One of the things I think is really important, I think in particular for people in senior roles when they join, is to ask a lot of questions and listen. The common failure mode for instant body rejection is I come into General Motors. Well, at Apple, we did this. At Twitter, we did this. Everyone be like, who cares? Like, this is General Motors. I would say this to the team over and over. I'm not going to turn in General Motors and Apple. Like, that's stupid. But what we can do is learn. I can understand, like, why are things the way they are?
Welcome to Signal to Noise by Riviera Partners, the podcast where leading executives share how they cut through the noise and act on what matters most. We go beyond the headlines to explore the pivotal decisions, opportunities, and inflection points that define their careers and shape the future of the companies they led. It's time to cut through the noise and get to the signal.
Hey, Mike, how you doing?
Hey, Ali. Great. How are you doing?
Great. Welcome to Signal to Noise. This is the first episode that we've done here. I don't know, have you ever been the first?
This is the first time I've been the first, but it's also my first podcast. So I'm excited to be here and thanks for having me.
Great. Well, I don't know if people know, but we go back 20 years.
That's right. It's crazy. We worked together when I had started composite software and you helped us find some folks.
So if I remember, Mike, we were introduced by Jim Gower at Palomar Ventures, and he said, you know, when you meet Mike Abbott, he's got these piercing eyes.
I don't know if that's good or bad. I guess he gave me some money, so I mean, it worked, whatever it was.
You know, there was like nothing about composite or what you guys were doing, just about, you got to meet this guy. He's got piercing eyes. And I'm like, okay.
I'll take it, whatever. All I know is that like over those last 20 years, like you've helped me as well as people on my team find amazing roles. So I'm very, very much indebted to you.
Thanks for the plug. I'll tee you up again later on. So you've been in some seminal places. You've been at Apple running cloud services there, GM running all of software for GM, Twitter when that thing was on the edge of extinction. You had your own startup. You've been an investor. What are some of the common threads that are consistent through those experiences?
Well, there's certainly a very nonlinear path that I've had, and I've been incredibly lucky to have some of these experiences, as you mentioned. I think when I reflect on like what's common, I've never done the same thing twice. And I think part of it's because I have this twisted enjoyment of being uncomfortable. Like I like being in situations where I go, oh, I'm not sure if I can do this. Whether it be something physically, like swimming across the bay with Escape from Alcatraz to, you know, when I joined Twitter and we found out, I went after I joined that our current MSP that we were in was out of space and power. And we were enduring the highest growth in the company's history. And yet the site was down all the time, every time Japan scored a goal in the World Cup that summer. But the team did an amazing job and, you know, got us out and got rid of the infamous fail whale. And you know, if anything, it just reinforces that, like, you know, having great people on your team is like just number one. It's not even the number of people, it's just having the right, great people. Much better to have fewer people than a lot of people that are just super high quality.
Were the problems the same in those places? Were you trying to solve for the same issues, or each thing was just completely unique and you had to go in there with a different playbook? I mean, was there anything that you could use from all your different experiences at that time?
It's a good question. You know, I think about like, you know, composite software, which you mentioned, started. A lot of the challenges there were, how do we get the right product market fit? How do we get the right product? How do we build the right thing for our customers? Which was really different from when I went to Palm and led the team that designed and built WebOS, where this is, I don't think public, but, you know, I joined and for various reasons made a decision to reset entirely what we were doing with WebOS after my first 30 days. And I had to do that because it was apparent that we were not going to ship on time to sprint. So like that was a different type of challenge because I had certain people on that team that had been at Palm for a number of years that were content with not shipping anything. Now all of a sudden we have to ship a brand new, not just an OS for a phone, but the cloud services, you know, the OT. We were the first to ship over-the-air updates before Apple. And the same thing happened at Twitter. I think a lot of times, you know, there's a set of people where if you put, you know, incredible challenges, they'll rise to the occasion to go solve those. And I've been very fortunate to have those types of people around me to kind of thrive for it, right? When fire starts, do you run to the fire or away from the fire? And I know I'm wired to run into the fire. And then I look for people around me that have that same mentality of, okay, like this is an interesting problem. Like, let's go fix it versus freaking out and going, oh my God, I need to cover my ass because something's not going to work and I don't want to lose my job. No, I never had that. And most of the people I've worked with have all had that same attitude of the mission's bigger than whatever the particular issue is. And so my partner, John Doerr, had this saying around, we back missionaries, not mercenaries in venture. And I think that same thing applies in companies where you really want to understand, like, why is the person at Apple? Like, why is the person at Twitter? Like, what's their motivation? Because having alignment around that mission is super important that I've seen. Because when someone's at a job just for like money, as an example, at least in engineering, I've never seen that work out really well for that person or the company.
So Composite, you handpick your own folks. At Twitter, you inherited a medium-sized team. Apple, Palm, GM, you've got thousands of developers. How do you find those people? You can't tell me that everybody in those organizations is ready to go. I mean, how do you kind of figure out real quickly what you got before it's too late?
Yeah, I didn't realize this. My career was kind of inverted, maybe compared to some where I had done a couple of different venture-backed companies and then went to big companies. And like you said, like my first two startups, like I grew engineering teams from 0 to 150. And like you said, I got to pick people. And then I went to Microsoft, but I was senior enough at Microsoft that like all the people around me were exceptional. They were all the technical fellows, the distinguished engineers. So it wasn't until I got to Palm where I was like, oh my gosh, like there are people here that I would not have hired. And yet I can't get rid of all of them because we have to ship this thing in 10 months. So then it becomes a challenge of like, how do you get a C+ player to operate as a B player? And I'm not going to say like that's not fun, but I think that's just the reality is identifying, who are the people that have that intellectual curiosity and that mission to want to go drive towards whatever direction you're going. And, and at Twitter was really a crazy growth experience, one that I don't know if I'd wish on anyone, because when I joined, the engineering team was I think 50 or 70 people and really had not had a head of engineering. And, when I left, the team was almost 400. And growing that fast is also, I learned, kind of not very healthy. Now, I think we had to do it because we had a lot of debt we had to go solve. But, I kind of learned the hard way that growing a team more than 10 or 15% a month, it's very difficult to do that in a healthy way where those new people can be productive very quickly. Even at Apple, I mean, great people at Apple, but look, there was a reason why they hired me to come in and run iCloud. The service was not performing at the level that people felt like it was Apple level quality. And so it was a combination of finding the diamonds in the rough who I felt like, were incredible ICs. So I always try to find, who are the strong ICs and like really listen to what he or she says. And then figure out what people do I need to bring in from the outside or promote from within. Now, in a lot of places, like I'll pick on General Motors, I had to hire an unusual amount of people, I think, from the outside to come in, which is not ideal at all. But there just wasn't the domain experience or expertise in shipping and delivering software. And Mary really wanted to build a larger presence out here. But, you run into challenges. Like in the case of General Motors, now there's, 150 people out here in the Bay Area. And now there's this California, Michigan thing, right? Like, oh, the Californians get this and this. And they have a different set of problems. And I don't pretend to have all the answers to these things, but this isn't even on my LinkedIn profile, but I got a minor in psychology just for giggles in my undergrad. And I'll tell you, like, I think it would be really healthy if more people studied psychology, because I think a lot of these jobs are around social psychology and trying to understand and empathize with people.
What motivates? I get it with Twitter, you're on a mission. With GM, I'm not quite sure what the mission is maybe, there, and, Apple somewhere in between. How do you figure out how to motivate these folks? I mean, is it down to each and every individual or?
Yeah. Well, I mean, let's take on General Motors. General Motors was like a crazy one. So I didn't know anything about automotive at all going in. And Mary, who's the number one reason why I went, I think she is absolutely a world-class CEO. What she did is she just took literally every piece of software that was being built at General Motors, from braking software to airbags to infotainment to corporate email, and said, here's Mike, here you go. 19,000 people. Okay. And I was like, wow, okay, I think probably more people than we need, but trying to identify who, in my mind, knew what they were doing. And I mean that with the utmost respect, because there were certain people at General Motors that were great people and were successful in other roles, but they were put in certain cases in roles that they weren't set up to succeed. And I, as a leader, I have to identify those people, and either there's another role or they may have to go. And that's a real bummer to have to go do that. But what I have always done too, and maybe it's because I did startups before bigger companies, I really enjoy getting to know people and trying to figure out like, how can I help them? So even at these really large organizations, like Apple was 2,000, this was 19,000, I would do these weekly sessions with, not just my directs. It was managers, it was ICs, and it was random people from all the organization. And I would get like 40 or 50 people either in person or online. And I'd pick 3 categories, let's say culture, product, and process. And I'd say, okay, and across these 3, I want to hear from you. What do you think we should start doing, stop doing, or continue doing? So, in person, we would use Post-it notes, and I came up, kind of hacked away with kind of a shared worksheet, actually. And it maybe sounds crazy, but like what I would do is like, okay, for the next 10 minutes, we're going to do process. Throw everything you think we should stop doing or continue doing or whatever. And then we go through the 10 minutes, and then I'd ask questions like, what do you mean by this? What do you mean by this? And I did that weekly. I did this at Apple when I started, and it was incredibly helpful for me to just get a pulse of like, what are people thinking about? What do they really want to solve? Like, there's maybe a view from my perspective of what needs to happen. And I'm getting to answering your question. Trust me. I think when people feel like they're being heard, it's easier for he or she to jump on whatever mission you're trying to drive. So like in the case of, General Motors, the mission was, frankly, to elevate software, because General Motors had been a hardware company for a century. And now all of a sudden software, especially with EVs are really batteries and software, but now software is a seat at the table. And so now software is driving requirements in the hardware. That's a brand new cultural change. That's a huge cultural change that's going to take years to happen. But it's, I think, finding these people that can help scale your mission too, if that makes sense. I'm one voice. I'm not going to know all 2,000 people or 19,000 people, unfortunately. That's frankly why I think I personally prefer smaller companies. But what you can do is you can find those influencers, if you will, across the team and make sure they understand the mission that you're on. Otherwise, one person doesn't scale. And I also know how engineers think. Like, I could go do an all hands like every week, and there still would be people that say, I don't know, I think he's full of shit. Like, I'm not sure, which is fine. That's just the nature of like engineers, which I love.
Were you kind of conscious of organ rejection? You being a Silicon Valley guy, and then you bringing in your crew, and you got the folks in Michigan. How did you navigate that?
Oh, very much so. Oh, yeah. Well, I think first it kind of depends on the situation a little bit, where if it's like code red, you may just have to make decisions very, very quickly, almost faster than you'd like. But one of the things I think is really important, I think in particular for people in senior roles when they join, is to ask a lot of questions and listen. Like the common failure mode for instant body rejection is, I come into General Motors, well, at Apple, we did this. At Twitter, we did this. Who cares? Like, this is General Motors. And I would say this to the team over and over, like, I'm not going to turn in General Motors on Apple. Like, that's stupid. But what we can do is learn. I can understand, like, why are things the way they are? I don't think enough leaders do ask questions with the intention to learn or understand versus like listening to a question and just thinking about like, what's the reply? Again, I'm very open. Like, even when I did these exercises, like, I was clear with people, like, just, if there's a bunch of things that we're going to start, we're not going to do all of them. But what I can tell you is at least now I've heard what you think we should start doing. And then frankly, in that situation, coming back to organ rejection, one of the other kind of byproducts of me doing that type of exercise was I would do that for 90 days, my first 90 days, and I'd do an all hands and I'd say, here's what you told me, here's what we're going to do. And that was powerful because now I'm not just making assertions not based on data. Engineers want to know, like, why are we doing this? It's like, you told me this is why we're doing it. And so like, there was nothing to reject, if that makes sense.
Makes total sense. Switching up topics here, I want to go back to Twitter, and you started to hit on it a little bit. So Twitter, here's the plug, Riviera. We did the search for you there. And I remember chatting with Peter Fenton, and we were having a conversation, and he said there's probably 15 people on the planet that can do this job. And if we don't get one of them, Twitter's going extinct. Classic Peter Fenton pitch. What was it like when you landed? Because I remember the fail whale was all over the news all the time. Twitter was, we hadn't seen growth like that for a consumer services product. It was really kind of the first one with that kind of hyper growth. I mean, what were the first 30, 60, 90 days of triage like for you when you landed? And I think when you landed in that place, there were maybe 130 or 40 people in the whole company at that time.
Total. Yeah. About half of that was in engineering. Well, keep in mind, I was coming from working on WebOS at Palm with John Rubinstein. And, John, he did the iPod at Apple for a long time. And I think he really tried to bring a lot of the Apple culture to Palm. And I can tell you that that culture is about the polar opposite of Twitter. Apple, very secretive, Palm secretive, Twitter, everything was very transparent, very open. And so for me personally, I had to do a lot of unlearning from just behaviors I thought before and really kind of try my best to enter with a growth mindset to learn and try to identify like what are the areas that are code red that need help today. And, I mentioned one that, we were out of space and power with our managed service provider. So, despite all this growth, we were down all the time. And one of the things that I had to go, this was a little bit later, it was about 5 or 6 months in, but I had to go to the board. Well, I talked to Dick first, but then I had to talk to the board and basically explain to them our current situation is a no-go. The data center we were supposed to move into, by the way, is leaking. I don't have all the answers, but here's the plan.
Physically leaking?
It was physically leaking. Yes. And the people who were on that, if they listen to this, they will verify. But I had to sit down with Dick and say, listen, I don't think the company, we can't ship any new product features until we move into our own data centers and stabilize the service. And I said, we've got to change the narrative that availability is an amazingly important feature. And it turns out better than any kind of new shiny new thing, running, that's what's going to help our growth right now. And to his credit, it was very supportive. People weren't too excited when I got up at tea time and say, for the next 5 months, we're not going to be shipping anything new. We're just going to be focusing on availability. But it was something that we had to do. And I think the engineering team appreciate it because, when you have a bunch of product managers, they want to ship stuff, understandably. But there's times where sometimes you have to go slow to go fast. And that was an intense example of that. Because as you can imagine, when we were down all the time, we would do tea time every week. And for those of you in infrastructure, typically the only time you get the light on you is when it's not working. And so that's when you're on stage. And so we really worked on how do we start having recognition for infrastructure that works? And, that was it was just a really important thing. And, even subsequent jobs, even at Apple, it's the same thing where no one really says anything when iMessage is running or iCloud's working. But boy, if it stops working, I get a note from Tim or whatever, understand what's going on. But, I think as an infrastructure leader too, recognition in the space is one that is a tricky one. I'd love to learn more. I'm sure other people got a lot of great approaches with that as well.
What were some of the scaling marks? What kind of numbers were you guys going through there, if you remember?
Oh boy. I want to say when I started, I think we were doing about 75 million tweets a day. And when I left, I want to say it was 225. And I think today it's 300, just to give you a sense. Maybe I'm wrong on the numbers. Don't quote me on today's because I don't know what today's numbers are. But it was stunning growth. And literally, as I said, initially, one of the largest user bases were people in Japan. And literally, at one point, the president of Russia came and visited our offices at Twitter, Medvedev. And the site was during World Cup going down and he wanted to send a tweet. And I'm like, oh my God, it's not going to work. And I don't know if he even knows this today, but he went in front of the company and sent the tweet, but it wasn't really a real tweet. We stubbed it out because it was down. And, those, and I could tell you other stories with Snoop Dogg visiting and whatnot, but, the scaling things, it's, there's obviously a lot of different metrics of driving that, but, it was really a privilege just to be a part of it and see it, especially when you had things like the Arab Spring and seeing the role that Twitter was playing in it, or even with the tsunami in Japan and people using Twitter to get medicines out to people because the cell network was down. And so that was awesome. I don't think anyone and us anticipated what Twitter would eventually become. There was a lot of dandelions and flowers, I guess, when I was there.
Right. And this was all pre-hyperscalers, right? You couldn't just go spin up a couple more. You had to plan and build this.
Yeah, it was kind of a tweener right before. It was on the edge where you could have maybe say we could have gone to AWS, but it would not have made sense cost-wise at that point in time. And I think subsequently they've used a lot more public cloud, and that makes sense.
Gotcha. So let's talk. I'll give you some. I'd love to hear your philosophy around leadership here. So, what models did you have early in your career? Or obviously, you have an approach and a framework to leadership. How did you develop that?
I think this is going to be probably not the normal answer because I didn't have a mentor from day zero and whatnot. A sport that you and I both played was rugby, and I think when you play sports, it doesn't matter what sport, but any team sport, you tend to develop skills around leadership. And I don't know about your team, but our rugby team, we had quite a diverse group of people. We had folks from ag, and here I am, like this nerd that's going to go do a PhD, like all over the map. But I learned later that that was one of those valuable skills, which is everyone's different. You got to meet people at where they're at. Okay. When I started my career, because I was doing startups, I had no idea what I was doing, and I really didn't have a mentor. So I just kind of made it up. And what that resulted in was certainly making probably more mistakes than I needed to, but I leveraged a lot of what I learned in sports. And, subsequently, I remember talking to my partner, Mary Meeker, about this, because we realized that at Kleiner, every partner, maybe minus one at the time, had done sports in college. And I think it's just interesting. And I'm not saying you have to do sports. It's just one of the areas where I think you can develop these things. For me, I didn't really have a true mentor until Twitter. Actually, it was Bill Campbell. He was part of my interview process, and oh my gosh, this guy is legendary. He's one of the reasons why I went to Kleiner Perkins. He agreed to come visit weekly as we tried to change the firm. But he by far had the biggest impact.
I think to give some folks a little context around Bill, if they don't know him, didn't he run marketing for Apple back in the day?
He ran marketing, a big part of sales for Apple for a while. Then he was on the board of Apple from late 80s till when he passed away. But then he also coached Larry and Sergey and then Eric weekly for years on the board of Intuit. He's the one that really connected Jeff Bezos to John Doerr for Kleiner's investment there. Just like a true godfather of the Valley. If you haven't read $1 Trillion Coach, the book, please go read it. It's great. And it's all about Bill. And I did not write it, so I can say it.
By the way, he's a rugby guy.
Yeah, because you coached football at Columbia, right? And you played. And then
yeah,
you always had hilarious stories about it. When I was younger, I always kind of wonder, do I tell people I played rugby or not?
They look at you, they think you're a mutant.
That's true. What the hell do you think you're doing? Running around hitting people with pads.
So in all these places, is there one critical hire that you look to make, or that you make sure that person is in the right seat?
I think it's maybe not even the hire, but it could be existing people, but you have to have people around you that you trust, and so it's easier if you've already had history to have trust. And it's not to say you can't build trust with, your employees, which is important too. But I think it's trust, but also that alignment on why you're there. And I'm not judging. There's different reasons why you do it. And there's no right or wrong. Some could say I'm doing this because I need to get paid to pay rent. Totally legit. That's a real need. That's a very different notion than why am I doing this? It's I want to go help the world communicate with each other or whatever. It's just different. So I always encourage founders to when you're hiring, especially those first 10 people, because that sets the culture, is you've got to still going to go hire smart people, know computer science, et cetera, but having that alignment of why they're there is it's just so critical. And I find that it's hard to get the answer to that in an interview, a traditional interview. You need to get them outside of the office, either for a coffee, going for a walk, or whatever, because you want to try to understand who they are as people.
How do you keep that bar high over time? As these organizations it's easy when you got 20, 30 engineers.
So another flashback that you just mentioned. So at one point, Benchmark or Matt Kohler asked me to spend some time with Kevin Systrom. Because Kevin, at the time, we actually helped Instagram a fair amount when they first launched, because they were having scaling issues and whatnot. So there was a couple engineers that actually helped out, because Kevin had interned actually at Twitter. But Matt asked me to talk to Kevin because they were starting to have a real hard time hiring. They were 7 or 8 people at the time. And, one of the things that I learned, at least in the 0 to 150s, is an engineer who joins at, we'll say number 9 or whatever, tends to, the person who joins at 20 is very different than the person that joins at 9. And it's not a lowering the bar, it's just that the shape of the bar is a little bit different. And so, because it's always a weird, it's just different. It's not a judgment call.
How is it different?
I think for someone who comes in at 9, they're in for the journey. They're in the trenches. They will do nights and weekends. Their motive is but at 50, that person can be just as committed. They probably have a life, which is not the worst thing in the world. And so there's just balance. And it's that's okay. And I think over time, you want to have kind of a real mix of that. And my first investment at Kleiner Perkins was into a company called Gumroad that Sahil Labanja started. And he was 19. And it was interesting, like seeing and trying to help him. Like, he was a 19-year-old, and at the time that was very unusual. Now you see a lot of it, but like this is in 2012, and helping him build a team, and also like, and he's a very, very mature, smart guy, realizing that he started he's bringing people with families, and like, how does that change his culture when you've got not everyone's below the age of 25, but now we've got some people that have other considerations, and how do you evolve how you do things? Like, I think the best founders see that and they adjust, and it's not about lowering the bar. I think that's the kind of misconception a little bit.
Do you think there's an age bias in Silicon Valley? I mean, how would you describe it for startups, and do you think it's necessary?
Yes, I think there's an age bias in all directions. And what I mean by that is, I think right now in particular, I think you're seeing it really heavily. So, I teach a class at Stanford, an undergraduate class in the computer science department, and there's about 300 kids this last quarter. And I don't know what the exact number, but let's say at least 250 are just like exceptional. And I've been helping some of those students get internships this summer, which I think for all grads have been quite difficult. And I was talking to this one student who's a freshman. And if you saw what he's accomplished by his freshman year, the term freshman is not even appropriate. Like it's like an antiquated label. So like that's one end of the spectrum of like, hey, in this world, like age is not necessarily the best metric. Now, if you go to the other end, I think you have to think about the mindset. There are people who are old that act old, and they don't want to, they're not curious, and they don't want to go learn, and they're stuck in their ways. And I think they're in deep with a lot of these advances in AI. As I've gotten older, what I've noticed is like, it's easier for me to find problems in things which I don't like, because it's like, I'm an optimist. I think you have to have that intellectual curiosity to want to continue to go learn. And I think sadly, a lot of people as they get older, like that goes away. But there are a lot of people who are older. Like I was just on a call right before this. A guy named Mohsen, I worked with at Microsoft. He was a technical fellow. I don't know what his exact age is, but like, he was a senior IC at Microsoft, very senior, and they, senior role at Meta. And, he was not 25, but like he has tons of amazing experience and they can play it. And he just wants to write software, which is awesome.
Well, I think the minute you stop being curious in this town, I think you're toast, no matter what.
I strongly agree. And in this world right now with AI, like it's like no joke. Like not only do you have to be, it changes like week to week. I mean, as we all know, like it's awesome and scary as at the same time.
So how do you see it changing development organizations going forward? Do you need less developers, or you still have the same amount of developers? They're working on more stuff. Is it a different level of developers? I mean, how are guys like you thinking about that?
Well, and as you can imagine, a lot of these students are asking questions too, like, what's it for me? Because I do think these entry-level software jobs are going to wane.
So when you say entry level, Mike, what do you mean by entry level? First job out of college program?
First job out of college. Yeah. But I think what's also happening though, which is countering some of that, is that like that student I mentioned, who's a freshman who, like, if you looked at his LinkedIn, it looks like 2 years past school. Kids are doing more interesting things much earlier in life. When I was 17, 18, I wasn't thinking about submitting a paper academically to go present all these different things. And it's like, wow. So like I think that gives me a lot of hope. Now that's not every student though. And so, it remains to be seen. I think with these tools, I had General Motors, they had about 1,000 people trying out Copilot, like 31% of the code was being generated, et cetera. We found that actually those tools tend to help more senior people than junior people, which is a little bit counterintuitive, but in a way it kind of makes sense. But there are a group of I was talking to someone the other day, there's also a category of people, and you mentioned age, that, they get so locked into using Emacs or, VI that they don't look at what does cursor enable, and they almost be resistant to that change, which I think is the other risk of like, yeah, okay, you got a bunch of senior people, but are they going to actually use the tools in the way that you want them to? And so, there's real balance of getting these kind of AI native employees, which I think are really important, these folks coming right out of school, but ensuring that like your more senior talent, like a Mohsen, has that intellectual curiosity to want to go learn and unlearn maybe what things worked before that may not work today. I think the net of it all is that, like, I think for tech companies, I think the impact's going to be smaller than for non-tech companies.
Interesting. If you're coming up through the ranks and you're going to be, you want to be the next Mike Abbott with those piercing blue eyes.
I don't know. I don't know if that's what you want to be, but I think my wife might say something different.
How does it change, like, the skills you have to acquire to kind of get, I mean, does it change or does it, like, what's the VP of engineering look like in the future?
One of the things I tell my students, which I think, I think it goes in any age, is that, if I look back, one of the things I wished I would have done more of earlier in my career is to network. And, I always tell students and other folks too, like, I've never had one even LinkedIn message that I get where if someone's asking for help that I don't answer and say, sure. And I think that's what sets this valley apart, is this pay it forward attitude. And I encourage like folks early in my career, like, leverage it. People want to help. I think it's like innate. People want to, advise and whatnot. There's certainly some bad actors, but I think for the most part, like, people are pretty genuine with want to do that. So I think networking is super duper important. The second is, when I was coming up, there weren't these open source projects. And so I think in today's world, you can start building your track record through open source contributions without being employed. Now, who knows? Like, I think you can also make an argument with some of these tools that's making it, even cheaper to start companies. So maybe you start a company. One of the reasons why I started Composite Software, which I've never told you this, is, Electron Economy, which is the company I was at before. I had to lay off 180 out of 220, sell it. And this is now at the end of 2001. And it wasn't like there was tons of jobs. So it was like, what am I going to do? Well, I might as well start something. And I think a lot of students are going to do that because it's like, oh, there's no jobs. Start something. There's nothing wrong with that.
Right. So that reminds me, what's some of the toughest conversations that you've had?
I think the most difficult conversations are when you have to do a layoff or a RIF. And I say that because when that happens, that's a failure by the company, not the individual. So, I'll never forget in 2001, when I got left holding the bag for this company. I had to lay off this one person, which I'll never forget. It was like my dad's age, and he was crying in my office, and I'm 20 something going, oh my God, like, this is horrible. Those are just conversations which are just not fun. And then there's no real great way to do a layoff. I think there's probably one good way, and there's many bad ways. And I think we've seen a lot of bad ways these last couple of years, which is, I think it really bums me out, because I think there's a way to be respectful of people and to try to handle it with grace. And I don't know if a lot of companies have handled it with grace.
If you were to do anything over in your career, do anything over looking back?
I don't know. I've been pretty lucky. I'll tell you a fun fact though, since we're like sharing, and I don't regret this, but it's something at the end of 2006, right after I accepted my role at Microsoft, Mark Zuckerberg offered me the role to run engineering at Facebook. And I didn't take it because I had met my now wife. But that was always one of those things like, oh, like.
What year was that?
End of 2006. And so it was one of the reasons why I was so excited about doing Twitter, because like, oh, I didn't do that. Like, but in general, like, I'm not a person that lives with regrets. I mean, look, if I had gone to Facebook, I wouldn't have my amazing daughter and wife. So like, it's all good.
So I'll ask you a couple more questions here. So you had a stint as an investor. Do you think being an operator and a technologist helped you or hurt you?
One of my motivations of going into venture at the time was from my bad experiences from investors who had never built anything telling me what to go do in my companies. Now I realize that in today's world of venture, like, a lot of that's kind of changed, but in 2011, whatever, that was relatively new. I'd like to think that helped. It's both an asset and a liability for investors. So it's an asset because an entrepreneur will like, oh, he or she, like, they'll be able to empathize and understand my pains, which is all true. The downside is, like, I like to fix things. And these things are not my company though. So I can't really fix things. Like, I'm not just on the sideline. I'm like way up in the stadium, right? And Bill used to always tell me this. He was like, Bill swore a lot, right? So he'd be like, look at all the board members. He's like, 70% are dumb 20% don't do anything. And then there's 10% that actually help. And, I think he's probably right. Like, I think, and so to come back to your question, I think being the founder and then becoming an investor is a little bit of a liability because you always believe you can fix everything and you're an optimist. And the investing is this strange balance between, dreaming the dream, as Mary used to always say. But at the same time, like, you have to find just one reason to say no to an investment. And, that's just mindset wise. I discovered too late that, like, investing's not for me. It's a very privileged role. Amazing to work with the entrepreneurs that I got to, but, like, I think there's a different wiring, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think, as an entrepreneur, you just kind of jump in there and do it. And I think, as an investor, I mean, I don't know, but I suspect it's a lot more getting people to do things through influence, which you have to do as an operator too. But, you've got a strong founder on the other side, right?
I think the thing that is kind of common, which is interesting, is especially in engineering, like, if I say, hey, we're going to go do X, everyone wants to know, why are we doing X? They're engineers. And so instead of just saying, we're going to go do X, you have to say, observation A, observation B, observation C, therefore X. And then people go, oh, they can come to their own conclusion. And that influence, that applies. It doesn't matter if it's on the investing side or on the operating side, because most companies are not command control organizations. Like, I hire senior engineers because they're smarter than I am, and they want to go solve problems. If I'm telling them how to solve the problem, they're not going to stay. This is weird.
So, reminded me of something you said. Most organizations are not command and control. So, what made Apple great at the end of the day?
Command and control. It's the only place I've ever been. I'm kidding. It really is. It's not my style personally, but it works very well for their products, and it makes sense. Like, there's a set of trade-offs, right? I mean, command control works well if the people that are on the command side you get the right decisions, right? Then it's like great. But I won't name names, but there's other companies that are much more consensus, which while might feel warm and fuzzy, like then you never can make a decision. So, I think that the reality is there's like a balance of both. I know in my career, I've done both. I think it really depends on the context and what's the decision that needs to be made.
Are there any great consensus-driven companies out there versus, or are they the majority of them more command and control, would you say?
Well, let's rephrase it. Let's not say consensus. Let's say companies that want to look at inputs from many different places to make a decision. I think Mary Barra does a very effective job at that, but then she'll also draw a line of like when decisions have to be made. So I'm sure other people have much more insightful comments on that than I do, but.
Well, we're going to wrap up here. I'm going to give you a couple rapid fire questions.
Let's do it.
Let's go. So, best piece of leadership advice you've ever received?
It's about the people.
One tool, book, or framework you think every leader should know?
The Art of War, Sun Tzu.
I like that book. I read that one. What's your personal leadership mantra or go-to operating principle?
Make fast, good decisions.
In one word, what does great leadership mean to you?
Empathy.
What one piece of unconventional advice would you give the next generation of leaders?
You probably can do more than you realize in areas that you're not comfortable with. And what I mean by that is, like, when I first started Composite, I was the CEO and I was very open with, I don't know anything about finance. I don't know anything about sales. And it turns out like you can learn those things. Like, it's not like rocket science. And so it's like a kind of a reminder that like humans in general, not because I'm special, I think humans in general can do more than they think they can. I think sometimes like we as a society talk more about these like constraints. And I think these tools in AI are going to even make this more profound, where it's democratizing so many aspects of just company building.
Love it. Well, Mike.
It was fun. Thanks so much.
Yeah, Mike, I totally appreciate your time and thank you for being the first.
Listen, again, like I owe you lots. This is fun. I will always help Rivera. So take care. It was great to see you, dude.
Appreciate you.
Likewise. Take care.
Signal to Noise is brought to you by Riviera Partners, leaders in executive search and the premier choice for tech talent. To learn more about how Riviera helps people and companies reach their full potential, visit rivierapartners.com. And don't forget to search for Signal to Noise by Riviera Partners on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere you listen to podcasts.